live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this week's second edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight,
Eskom has assembled experienced technical teams to improve performance and to recover capacity at power stations.
As the country is hit by higher load-shedding stages, President Cyril Ramaphosa walks a tightrope as he tries to explain the energy crisis to investors ahead of Thursday's State of the Nation address. The real meaning of his keynote address today at the Mining Indaba is what we're going to explore with our panel for this evening.
It is within the preserve of the board to do its work. It is the part of their responsibility to go out and seek for opportunities to grow.
This deal, it ends here today, now.
Parliament, meanwhile, has moved faster than the Eskom switch guys in granting the president his wish. The National Assembly Tourism Committee pulls the plug on the 1 billion rands deal involving SA Tourism and English football club Tottenham Hotspur. We'll speak to the committee's chairperson. We'll also bring you an update on Parliament's readiness to host Thursday's State of the Nation address. The Watchdog starts now. 2 days before he delivers his State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa today came face to face with a sector of the economy that's reeling from the damage and devastation caused by the electricity crisis. Mining production in South Africa last year reached a record high of 1.18 trillion rands, boosting our GDP, exports and revenue. It accounts for close to 500,000 direct jobs and close to 1 million indirect jobs. Last year, though, the industry contracted by a whopping 9%, largely due because of the energy crisis. But is there a plan to address the crisis? Yes, says the president, and here's how.
6 months ago, we announced a National Energy Action Plan to improve the performance of our existing power stations and to add new generation capacity to the grid as quickly as possible. Eskom, our electricity generation and transmission and distribution company, has assembled experienced technical teams to improve performance and to recover capacity at power stations, with an initial focus on the 6 least reliable stations. Through a regional power pool agreement, we have already imported 300 megawatts of capacity from neighboring countries and are working to increase this by an additional 1,000. The successful renewable program is being strengthened and implemented. In the last 6 months, we have signed agreements for 25 projects representing 2,800 megawatts of new energy. Now, these projects will soon be proceeding to construction. We are facilitating investment in new generation capacity by private producers, by, amongst other things, removing the licensing threshold for embedded generation projects. Eskom is looking to purchase surplus power from companies with available generation capacity.
Our panel for this evening consists of economists Pelisa Ngomo and Davi Roth. Good evening to both of you. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Good evening to you. And Pelisa, good evening to you.
Does that sound like a plan, Davi Roth?
Well, to be honest, we've heard most of this before. So I must tell you, I'm not very excited about all of that. There are one or two things that make me change my mind a little, could change my mind a little bit. One is that the president put some effort or some emphasis on the participation of private sector in electricity, but not only electricity, but also in things like, for example, railroads and even harbors and so on. It's not only the president, you get it from government more and more nowadays. So that's something I think a little bit different. But to be honest, we've heard much of this before. And the proof, as I say, is in the eating. The proof, let's wait and see what's going to happen here. But if they just do what they said they're going to do, then I think things will start looking a little bit better. But I'm afraid this government is not really known for actually implementing all the plans that they've made.
Pelisa, from where you sit. Please unmute. Okay, we seem to be having problems with Pelisa's line. Let me get back to you, Davi, because the reason, we're putting a little bit of emphasis today on this particular speech, or what the president had to say today, was one, as you would have heard from my intro, this is a very important sector of the economy, and given the record high levels that production reached last year, so it was an important forum. And coming as his speech did today, a couple of days before he delivers his State of the Nation address, one would imagine that today would have been as good as it gets in terms of him giving a very important sector of the economy a sense of what he is or he can say or promise come Thursday.
Yeah, we're all waiting to see what the president is going to say on the State of the Nation address, and of course we're all sitting and wait what the president is going to say when it comes to the new cabinet, because obviously there are going to be changes made in the new cabinet. There's a lot of speculation out there. I really thought that the president will make the announcement on the new cabinet before the State of the Nation. But anyway, so the State of the Nation apparently is going to be happening first, and we can speculate on what's going to be in the State of the Nation. Now, I must tell you one or two things. I did mention that the private sector participation, or the emphasis on private sector participation, that's something that's new to me. What is also new to me is that the president did not put too much emphasis on value add to our minerals in South Africa. There's nothing wrong to add some value to our minerals in South Africa, but we're just not good at it. We have to specialize in certain things, and we're good at taking stuff out of the ground and sending it out to somebody else to add more value to that. So that is another good one, not too much emphasis on that. The president also made it very clear that the private sector will have an easier job in getting involved in mining in South Africa. And you did mention the importance of mining in the country. What does this all say for the State of the Nation address? I think what it says for the State of the Nation address, it's very obvious that electricity will be a major topic, and the president will say a lot about that. Unfortunately, the real message that I want to hear about electricity, I haven't heard that. And there are two things that we have to understand if we want to fix electricity in South Africa, if we want to fix Eskom. Well, fix electricity is that you have to understand that Eskom's got too many people that are probably overpaid. Not all of them, of course, but there are too many people that you have to cut the cost of Eskom. And if you do that, inevitably that means that you probably have to fire some people. And if you do that, just before an election, people are going to get angry and not going to vote for you. And that's a very important step that politicians are, I'm sure, not be prepared to take. The second important thing is you have to do something about the revenue side, your income. And that means that people that owe you money, they must pay that money. And then the president made a huge mistake, as far as I'm concerned, when he suggested that some municipalities that their debt should be written off for Eskom. Now, you cannot save a company that's completely bankrupt by making these kind of suggestions. And the president also mentioned that perhaps Eskom should not implement the increase in electricity prices that was recommended by NASA, for example. So those are all sort of contradictions that I'm unsure about the president really understanding. Or, well, let me rephrase it. I'm sure he understands. I'm just not sure he wants to take the political risk in implementing all those things that are required to save Eskom. In the meantime, he is putting emphasis on private sector participation, which is a good thing, because I think that's the only alternative to get things going again. So electricity will play a major role in the State of the Nation address, and I think that is perhaps where the most of the emphasis will be. Apart from electricity, maybe one or two hints on what his new cabinet is going to look like, and there will be some, I'm sure there could be some interesting between the lines comments by the president on that.
Of course, Simon Pellis, electricity being a major or big feature of that speech is one thing, but if it's going to be more of the same with no real practical solutions to the problem we've known about for years now, that's not going to make a huge, if any, difference.
Well, I think the speech by the president was very positive, and we should welcome it. Obviously, the real issue for me is really the execution, because it's not really far off from the energy plan that the president has actually announced. For instance, I think one of the key issues for us, of course, as citizens, we do get worried about that we would really like Eskom to remain the supplier of choice, because we know that when Eskom is the supplier of choice, it means that we can buy electricity cheaper. So there are three variables that you have to consider in this proposal that the president is making. Firstly, it's around the cost, which is the access of electricity, the issues around equity issues, and the issues around the sustainability. And if his proposals really address these three, then we should really start, we should be less anxious about his plans. But the reason I'm saying that we are worried, and David seems to be happy with the idea of a private sector participating. But obviously the issue for ordinary citizens who are poor, whom most of them actually not working, would worry about the cost of electricity. And obviously, if the cost of electricity is higher and families, households are actually struggling to afford, is that obviously there are going to be equity issues. So, in essence, I do think that they might really have to think about the implications. In fact, already, the Eskom is spending about 25 billion on renewables. In fact, it's one of the biggest spending around, buying of the electricity. For me, the key issue, and this is really an important ideological issue, which the president has an opportunity in this restructuring process, is to make it sure that with all these other interventions, particularly around the renewable or the gas, or nuclear, that Eskom actually takes up shareholding for several reasons. I think firstly, that Eskom uses the opportunity that the shareholding to upgrade its technology, because Eskom is one of the oldest power utility in Africa or even in the world, to upgrade its technology. The second one is that it's able to upscale the skills of workers, and that workers are not going to lose jobs. And that's also obviously the third issue, is that there's still some income that Eskom can earn. And I know that more often than not, when you use, market fundamentalism, people would actually argue that why would then Eskom be the buyer and also own the shareholding? But the key issue is that most of these resources that are used to generate electricity, particularly if you talk about the sun and the wind, these are the resources of South Africans. So what is it that South Africans are benefiting from? And they could easily benefit by Eskom being a shareholder and ensuring that, when Eskom draws its dividends from this shareholding, then it strengthens its balance sheet, and in essence, it's able to provide electricity much cheaper.
David talks about how, and this is a question we explored even last night here on the program, that, for example, one of the things that could have or could give people a deal of confidence that the president and the rest of the executive, including add to that the leadership of Eskom, are on top of things. There's a new thinking that will hopefully yield results in ways that we haven't seen, in the last while. Would have been, the announcement of a cabinet. What people are clear about who is going to take charge of this area of work and make up their own minds about whether it's people they can trust, people they can rely on, and there's not going to be same old. Well, what would you say to that, Philisa?
Yeah.
In fact, I agree with Dad on that one. I'm even though we know that the appointment of a cabinet is always managed under secretary rules. But I think the issue of leadership is going to be extremely important because at some point we had confidence in the minister who is currently in the portfolio of energy, who heads Eskom and the state-owned enterprises. And obviously what we see, it looks as though that the minister is actually overwhelmed. So the issue of leadership is going to be important. In fact, broadly, by the way, beyond the energy issue, if you look at the various crises that South Africa is confronted with, firstly, the World Economic Forum raised the issue of state collapse, the state failure. It raised the issue of debt crisis, dilapidating infrastructure. It raises the issue of declining in livelihoods. It raises the issue around the shrinking, economic output. Of course, what they forgot was gender-based violence, that women in this country live in fear and that, in fact, they're scared of leaving their houses after 6 o'clock. So that should be the stick to it. We must tell the forum that must not let us out because women's lives matter. So, in essence, even with the issues of listed, so it means that you actually really need to get cabinet that is extremely competent. Because we've had an experience where, combat appointment take place, and then spend 2 to 3 years learning the portfolio, and then only start delivering at some point. And that's why, by the way, that's what in fact has led to South Africa to where it's been. Because in essence, at the time when the minister is meant to deliver, they have to, they're shifted into another portfolio. We actually need to encourage that if someone has studied leadership or someone has studied, housing finance, they must be put in the portfolio of housing finance. They must not be put into a portfolio of social policy or social development. Someone who has expertise in international relations must be moved to international relations, not be put in social development. Because then in essence it means that you're making that person to be two persons, but also actually you need to give them, you need to make it sure that they pivot in their portfolio and in fact they actually, deliver because they have expertise of that portfolio. And I'm hoping that the president this time around, when he really appoints his cabinet, he makes it sure that he actually assigns people with expertise. But it's not a cabinet that is going to have to go through a capacity building exercise before they can actually deliver what they're expecting. And I'm thinking, by the way, that he's actually quite aware that we are getting into the election fever, and so it is mean that he's clear that South Africans are paying attention to who will be in the cabinet and who they will be voting for in 2024.
Well, I'm glad that this is coming from economists because I was having similar conversations with, our panel last night consisted of a political analyst. And I thought maybe if I ask the same questions to economists, we will have different arguments or issues to raise. And it brings me to one of the big stories this evening, which I'm going to next, and that is the the Portfolio Committee on Tourism unanimously agreeing today that the proposed 1 billion rand sponsorship deal to the English Premier League club, Tottenham Hotspur, has to be cancelled with immediate effect. Now, again, a conversation we've been having over the past couple of days, that at a time when we should be looking back at quite a number of promises the president made last year with regard to tourism, what needed to happen. People here tasked with very specific responsibilities to look at the e-visa system, for example, and the things that we were told last year are being done in areas like China and India, which can bring in lots and lots of tourists. And the argument has been made over and over again about the role that tourism can actually play in creating employment and so on and so forth. And days before the State of the Nation address, we're talking about this 1 billion rand deal. Davi?
Yes. I just want to say I can't hear Vanessa very well. So if I can just make a few comments about the electricity, and I'll get to that if I may. Okay,
that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to say, and I couldn't hear very well, I just have to say that. It's very unfortunate that we couldn't see the new cabinet before the speech of the president today, because one of the major problems in the cabinet that today is Gwede Mantashe, and is he going to still be the minister responsible for electricity, as an example? Because if he still is, I'm not so sure that the president is really serious about fixing our electricity problems. A second point that I want to make is that electricity in South Africa is actually far more expensive than what we think, because Eskom gets a bailout from the taxpayers all the time. So electricity, the price that you pay for electricity is not the full price that you actually pay for electricity. A third point that I think is important, we talk about this electricity plan. This is not the full plan for electricity, because there's no financial plan for Eskom, as an example. You can't fix Eskom without having a proper financial plan. The financial plan is just not there. We're waiting for the Minister of Finance, hopefully, will give us a bit of a financial plan for Eskom, because, like, for example, how much debt he's going to take over. Coming back to your question about this $1 billion that's going to go to sponsorship to an English soccer team, I think there's so much more that we can do with the R1 billion. This is poking your finger into the eye of the average South African by saying that you can spend R1 billion on sponsoring some English soccer club. There are people in South Africa, more than 10 million people without jobs, and high levels of poverty in South Africa, rising levels of poverty, no economic growth. And you think you're going to get value for money out of spending R1 billion on sponsoring a soccer club in Britain? No, surely. Tourism in South Africa has got massive potential, and there's much that we can do to fix and to get more tourism or more tourist activities in South Africa and attract more tourists to South Africa. The best way to attract more tourists to South Africa is just to do the normal stuff that's going to make it easier for South Africans to stay there in South Africa. And that will include things like, for example, make it a safer place. Make sure there's electricity, as an example. Make sure that we have proper infrastructure that works properly. Make sure, like what you've mentioned, the e-visa system works properly. That sort of stuff, that's all you need to do. South Africa's got everything going for it. We've got all the natural wonders in the world. We have it in South Africa, wonderful people, everything to visit in South Africa. Just make it easy for people to get here and make it easy and safe for people to move around in South Africa, and they will come. They know about South Africa. They know about Table Mountain. They know about Kruger. They know about all these wonderful things that we can offer in South Africa. You don't need to put a South African flag on somewhere on the chest of a foreign soccer player to get foreigners to come to South Africa. They know about this place. They've seen about it. We've had a World Cup soccer in South Africa. They know about it. They want to come here, and I've spoken to many of them, including my own family. Do not want to come in South Africa. They've immigrated. They don't want to come to South Africa because they're scared. It's a dangerous place. Fix that. Use the R1 billion for that, and the tourists will come. And we can double the size of tourism in South Africa, and that will add to economic growth and a much better life for all South Africa.
Of course, I digressed a bit because I felt that this is in the context of what both of you were talking about with regard to, the appointment of a cabinet and why that is irrelevant to us to that issue, because it also spoke to, as you may have seen today, what happened in Parliament. I mean, that committee also called in the Minister of Tourism, who, of course, had to talk about how she sees this whole saga, which I thought was important. The board was also there because they needed to deal with all the key stakeholders at about the same time. But I won't get to the rest of the issues of leadership that I also wanted to get into in the interest of time. But there's a comment that the outgoing CEO of Eskom made today, and I think it becomes important in the context of what our conversation was, or at least where we started with regard to what needs to happen at Eskom. Take a listen to what Andre de Ruyter had to say today, and I'd like your comments to what he had to say today as well. Okay, we seem to be having a problem with that particular soundbite. But let me then move on to the rest of what both you and Pelisa Davi think would also be, everyone agrees around the energy issues. Everyone agrees around leadership, that, something has to, or there has to be the clearest indication from the president as to what his thinking is, so that then people can make up their own minds about whether or not we are on the right track, or he is saying all the things that he had to say. But what are the other areas that for you are the areas he should really say not just something but a lot on?
To be quite honest, I have pretty much, and not only me, most South Africans, we've lost confidence in the South African government. And whatever the president says, it's not really, unless he really comes with something radical, I'm afraid that we will just conclude that this is just business as usual and not much is really going to change. What we need to do now, what we need to hear is for the president to take another road here and to say something completely different. I must say, I heard some of that today. Like, for example, beneficiation. Usually that is part of his speech. That was not part of his speech today, which is a good thing. Like I've also mentioned already, the private sector participation, that is another good thing. But what I would like him to say is that we are going to change track here, and we are going to really make a plan to get rid of all the state-owned enterprises, and we are going to put South Africa first, and we are going to get private sector participation. And that's just really the kind of thing that I've kind of heard today. But again, I'm not so sure I'm going to really believe it, even if he says that. But the real test, I think, will come when he needs to make political decisions. And the political decisions will actually be illustrated when he decides on his cabinet. And he must get rid of a couple of guys in his current cabinet. The minister today that was supposed to be in Parliament to explain the silly 1 billion rand that they want to waste, my taxpayers and your taxpayers' money, they want to waste it on sponsoring a foreign soccer team. She wasn't even in Parliament, as far as I understand. You can correct me on that. No, that is, that's disrespectful to the people of South Africa. She must go. And she called the president a liar in public. Another guy that must go is Gwede Mantashe. He simply must go. He's an obstacle for mining. He will be an obstacle for electricity, for energy in South Africa. He simply must go. I don't think the president will get rid of him because of political reasons. And there are many other guys that I think should go. And I think what the president needs to do is that he needs to send the message that we need a cabinet that means business, and that means a much smaller cabinet. And I always use this example about Minister of Sport or a Deputy Minister of Sport. Just think about it. What does a Deputy Minister of Sport, what does he do? I can't think of what the responsibility of a Deputy Minister. We don't need that portfolio as an example. We need a smaller executive, and we need the executive that's effective and efficient. Another guy that certainly must go is Pravin Gordhan. He has been a disaster as the Minister of Finance. Look at the numbers. look at his fiscal deficit, look at what's been happening to state debt. And of course, it's not only him, but they set the whole momentum in progress, where the state finances became unsustainable where it is at the moment. And of course, he was a disastrous Minister of State-owned enterprises as well. It was under his watch that the state-owned enterprises collapsed and where the civil servants got well above inflation increases, that sort of stuff. He must go. Yeah, he's a certain disaster. That's the kind of things that I really want to see from a president. Not what he says, but what he does. And I will wait to see what his announcement on the cabinet is going to be. Then I might start putting some more, or get a little bit more confidence in the president. So far, I'm afraid the president is a talking president and not a doing president.
Pelisa, what are you waiting to see outside of electricity and leadership stroke cabinet-related issues?
I mean, I just want to comment about the speech the president made today, by the way. I think for the first time, though, I mean, if you look at the speech, besides the energy-related issues, I think he kind of like really delved into industrial development issues, which I've not had in a long time, which is really about, beneficiation and using our commodities, right, to build this economy. And he is implicitly raising the need for South Africa to actually make it sure that the value chains that are associated with mining commodities versus consumer goods that we use, that in fact it's something that we need to do yesterday. And I just hope that the sentiment contained in the speech will then be concomitant to both the type of leadership he gets to appoint in cabinet, but as well as the resources that get given to the portfolio that is responsible for industrial development, because beneficiation does not just fall from the sky. It's capital intensive, and it requires a state that has high, appetite for risk and able to learn and learn by doing. So that's the first issue. I think the second issue, I thought it was quite interesting for President to even delve into the role of labor social plans within the mining sector. And it's possible that someone might have whispered that the mining sector may not be fulfilling this role very well. And he goes into detail around the role of these funds, but also the relationship between the mine itself and as well as the community, and the need to invest in those communities. And I know that part of the alternative mining in Daba, which sits right in the parallel of mining in Daba, intended specifically to deal with the fact that, the social labor plans by mining companies normally is just a tick box exercise. It has no qualitative outcomes, meaning that when you look in terms of the tangibles, mining houses hardly commit to some of the things, but they would have committed to in the plan, but also that there are no accountability instruments that are existing to hold mining houses accountable, and that sometimes the departments are so overwhelmed, also don't have technical capacity to hold the mines accountable, to make it sure that they fulfill their commitments within the social labor plans. And I thought for me, that emphasis and him, going into details about the value and the need to was actually, quite useful. I mean, I do think that what the president really needs to do in the 6 risks that have actually been highlighted, he would really, really need to do something that is out of the ordinary. I mean, I don't know if cabinet members, when they get appointed, really, the president does look at what we call, what is the experience, what's the leadership experience, right? What's the maturity of individual? And what that I'm about to appoint, I mean, besides the politics, because in any case, they would have been coming from the same party. So they know the politics, the maturity, the leadership, but also what other technical nuances they have when I'm actually appointing them into this position so that they actually deliver. I mean, really, our community, I really, really enjoyed it. In fact, if I can have a small bite for you, even on the tourism issue, but I'm just going to say just 1 or 2 lines about it, is that what is really unsettling about this advertising plan or the spending of the 1 billion is the fact that the Department of Tourism lost a case where they were allocating 2 billion to tourism products, who actually need, support as part of COVID recovery. And after they've lost that case, I would assume that this 1 billion should actually be going to those, tourism products. Even the second issue, tourism sector, by the way, is such an untransformed sector.
Well, I want to stop you there, but I'm going to also add or say that your guess is as good as mine as to why they wouldn't do the latter but opt for what was being discussed in Parliament today. But allow me to, let's leave it there for tonight. Let me thank both of you, Pelisa Ngomo and Dabi Road, economists we're hearing from an economist's perspective today. Yesterday, of course, we had political analysts looking at some of these same issues, but of course from their own prisms, so to speak. After the break, the National Assembly's Oversight Committee on Tourism pulls the plug on the 1 billion rand deal involving SA Tourism and English football club Tottenham Hotspur. We speak to the committee's chairperson about that issue. Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Tourism has unanimously agreed that the proposed 1 billion rand sponsorship deal with English Premier League soccer club Tottenham Hotspur has to be cancelled with immediate effect. It also wants an investigation into the proposed deal. SA Tourism was heavily criticised for this, saying it is failing to take into consideration the socio-economic challenges that the country is facing.
A proposed 1 billion rand sponsorship deal that would purportedly boost South African tourism has gone south. 5 board members approved the sponsorship deal that would have run over 3 years at a cost of 330 million rand per year.
My role is to propose to a board, and a board says yes or no. And I will continue to bring projects for as long as I'm allowed to do so. But the point is that the board is the one that says yes or no. And once a board has said yes on condition X, Y, and Z, then that particular responsibility is now shared between management and the board.
The deal has left MPs fuming.
And where we are seeing now the money is going, we can see that you want to take it to a wrong place. I am saying, Chairperson, without any shadow of doubt in me, no doubt whatsoever, this decision is one that I will desist from, one that I reject, and one that I will never agree with as long as I am here in this parliament representing the poorest of the poor.
And this is actually a great presentation to motivate for a soccer team, not for tourism. Because the point keeps being made about how much there's exposure. But nowhere does it talk about how it's being converted into tourism. And that I find very interesting, because there's no scientific basis on how this is being described.
The shareholder also says it was unaware about it, as it didn't need her approval.
It is within the preserve of the board to do its work. It is the part of their responsibility to go out and seek for opportunities to grow the entity, to grow the environment that we're working in, and they don't need the minister's permission, except when it exceeds a particular financial amount.
The committee says it was sidelined while taxpayers' money were going to be used. It also says the South African Football Association should have been brought on board as the country's soccer mother body. It wants the deal scrapped.
This deal, it ends here today, now, because there's everything and a lot wrong about the deal itself. And we are saying there must be an investigation on this matter with immediate effect.
The committee also bemoaned the instability of the SA Tourism Board. The board has a period of 3 months in existence, and during this period, it has had 3 chairpersons. Tourism SA says no expenses have been incurred on the deal except towards efforts to clinch it. Lula Mamatya, SABC News, Parliament.
Now, the chairperson of the Tourism Portfolio Committee of the National Assembly is Thandi Mahambehlala, who joins me now on the line. Good evening, Ms. Mahambehlala. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening, Vuyo. Thank you for having me.
Let's take a step or two back to say, subsequent to the stories that were written on this, from the very first one by Daily Maverick, what about what you saw, what you read, what you heard troubled you the most, to a point of deciding as the committee that you have to call everyone who matters in as early as possible?
First of all, we are the representatives of South Africans because as members of parliament, we are voted for by South Africans to be there in parliament. And I also want to state the fact that we appreciate what the communicators of this country has brought to their attention of everyone that cares to listen on this particular issue of Tottenham Hotspurs. And some people think that the media went wild on this matter. And we are saying as Portfolio Committee, rightfully so, the media went wild on this particular issue, and we commend the whistleblowers that brought this to the attention of the country. And our responsibility as legislators is to ensure that there's accountability, oversight, and people are accountable on everything that they do, whether it's good or bad, because as parliamentarians, that is our primary responsibility. So after this matter has transpired, we had already agreed on a program of parliament, and today we're supposed to have another entity. And then we thought it was important that we prioritize this issue. That is a pain to our society and the ratepayers and everyone else that is a South African that has raised a concern on the matter. So we invited the SA Tourism Board because we did not want to fall into a prey and make a prognosis of what had transpired before we could listen to them and make conclusive decisions. So that's why we had this portfolio committee today to afford the board to speak and present to the portfolio committee on this matter. And unfortunately, at the time we had our meeting, the board was leaderless in terms of the political heads. We had apologies. And we felt that we were in an entanglement of sort as a portfolio committee, because not someone who was introduced to us. It was a situation that we once had in our country of a weekend special of sort, because the chair was appointed over the weekend. That's what we got as a report, and it's on record. And we felt that the chair, which was appointed over the weekend, it would be unfair for us to hold him accountable hand, and then we then afforded the board acting CEO to present to the portfolio committee.
Okay.
And the board members that were present when this deal was tabled before South Africa.
Well, in the interest of time, let's go through a few issues that are out there in the public domain. One is, among the issues that a lot of people raised when this issue came up was that, that money could go elsewhere. And again today, for example, there was an issue of SAFA having to be involved. One of the MPs saying there in that insert that you could have bought a club with this money and that kind of thing. And I remember, and you'll recall this, I'm sure, last week, the acting CEO saying he has a legislated mandate that's got nothing to do with some, if not many, of the issues that people were raising. His job and the job of the agency is to sell the country using scientific tools, he suggested. And these were known the world over. This is what everybody who is in our situation does, And did those issues come up today? And what is your attitude as the community towards those particular utterances from the acting CEO?
Look, Vuyo, we were decisive and upfront about those matters because we felt as a portfolio committee it was very arrogant for the acting CEO to utter such words to South Africans. One, we made it clear to say it can never be accepted that the acting CEO goes public and tells South Africans that the money for tourism has got nothing to do with a country riddled with potholes, electricity, water problems, and it's not their problem. That did not sit well, and we had to reprimand the acting CEO, and subsequently had apologized to South Africans on that. And this money that we are talking about, as the portfolio committee, we felt that there are things that would have been prioritized because if you want visitors in your house, for sure you make it a point that your house is quickly clean and so that the visitors are comfortable. Now, bringing visitors in a country that is riddled with potholes, for us, it was not going to work. And we are saying that there are areas recently that we saw, for instance, where people are crossing the river in a locked drum and they are suffocating there. For them to be able to access the medical facilities, they have to do that every day.
And to the argument
that as a country.
And to the argument that, to fix potholes is someone else's job. To fix hospitals and rivers and roads is someone else's job. Why burden this guy and the agency that has a very particular mandate with those kinds of things? And perhaps that this issue, it raises a whole host of other issues. In other words, about government and how government as a whole is functioning. Cabinet is where some of these issues need to be addressed, whether it's the safety of the visitors who come here as tourists, whether it is the roads that they have to travel in, and whether it is the hospitals that they have to go to in the event something happens to them.
For sure, Vuyo, when you are to embark in such a magnitude a program, there has to be intergovernmental interactions for you to be able to ensure that what you are about to implement, it will also include everyone else. For instance, the acting CEO made a bold statement to say this whole deal is not about soccer. It is about aggregated audiences. And for you to access that audience here in South Africa, you can never do it outside the South African Football Association. Then for us also, it was a clear indication that the state of readiness on this particular deal was not convincing, and let alone the fact that it had nothing to contribute or had no impact to the lives of South Africans, because the presentation did not even tell us how is this deal going to enable those footballers of the country that are ambitious enough to say one day I want to see myself as an international professional footballer. That presentation did not give us that as the portfolio committee.
Okay.
And there's lots of flaws in the presentation itself, which were tabled before the portfolio committee. Hence, we arrived at a decision to say this deal must stop today. And also the contradictions that were there.
Okay.
Because
now, when is,
unanimously they
yeah.
on the table.
Okay.
And if there's no deal on the table, what are we discussing?
Now, so the deal is off the table completely. Now, it's not pending some other process or clarity on certain issues. Then they may have to come back and you look at those issues and then decide whether or not it can proceed. This is it. It's dead in the water.
There's no deal. Vuyo, the minister, when she arrived in the meeting, although she arrived late, she made a bold statement to say there's no deal. The deputy chairperson of the South African tourism said there's no deal. The acting CEO said there is no deal. So hence we said, as the portfolio committee, the issue of the deal of Tottenham Hotspurs, it will never exist. That according to the submissions that were tabled before the portfolio committee, and it ends today here. As we speak, there's no deal on the table on the Tottenham Hotspurs because it has no impact to the lives of South Africans.
Ms. Mamashala, let me thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you so much for your.
She's the chairperson of the National Assembly Tourism Committee. In a moment, we'll give you an update on Parliament's readiness to host Thursday's State of the Nation address. Don't go away. Parliament has set aside about 8 million rand to cover the costs of this year's State of the Nation address. President Cyril Ramaphosa will address the nation on Thursday evening and will be covering it live here on the SABC News channel. Last year, Parliament spent nearly 6 million rands on the event. Former President Thabo Mbeki, Chief Justice Raymond Zondo and his deputy Mandisa Maya, along with 15 other judges, are among the 263 invited guests. The EFF is threatening to disrupt the president's address over the Phala saga, while some civic organizations are planning to march on Thursday to call for an end to rolling blackouts. We leave you with that update.
We have taken note of planned marches, protests on the day of the State of the Nation address. Peaceful protests are a feature of our constitutional democracy and a means to express views on the State of the Nation address. Appropriate arrangements will be made to receive memoranda where required.
The political protest is legitimate if and when it happens within the rules. Otherwise, we are not governed. We are not doing what we want to demonstrate to people, that in managing their affairs, we will do so fairly and properly and with respect. Any conduct that departs from that must be, it's not acceptable.
We will ensure that the rules of Parliament are applied. And our understanding really is that members of Parliament are familiar with the rules themselves.